Okay. I guess, okay. Cool.
That's to give us wisdom, I didn't know.
You know, it's going for ugly.
That doesn't know. How you doing? Did a good Thanksgiving?
Yes.
Mine too, then.
It's not, just been using it all these years. It's it.
Yeah.
All right, let's call this Community Library Network Board of Trustees special meeting to order. Let's see, all the trustees are here and we have the Pledge of Allegiance on the agenda. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I hate to say this, you guys, but I'm gonna have to add a little thing to the agenda under executive session. We did not put action item. And so I would like a motion to amend the agenda to add that.
Where is it, Madam Chair?
After executive session, we need to have action item, I'm pretty sure, since it's a voting thing. And we did not put that on there.
So you just need a motion?
To add the words action item to the executive session.
I move that we add the words action item to the executive session part of the agenda.
Okay, it's been moved to add the word action item to the executive session part of the agenda. Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you. And nobody's opposed, right? So here's the deal, guys. We're gonna do better. We promise. At any rate, okay, now, and, I'd like to welcome Jim McNall from ICRIMP for roles and responsibilities of elected officials, and you are on.
Okay, thank you. So first things first, and most importantly, questions, comments are fair game at any time. You cannot throw me off track because I'm never on track.
Oh, can I say can I just interrupt you right now at the very beginning and say one more thing? And, am I throwing you off track?
No, you're.
We put executive session in there. Most of this session will be, a workshop, but we put executive session in there in case we come upon some things that would be better discussed just with our board. And so please feel free to ask for that at any time. It'd be nice to go through the workshop, and then if that's something we need, please feel free to ask for it. So there, I'm done now.
Okay, but then let's go around and introduce ourselves.
Oh, that's a good idea. Okay.
So I know who you all are because of that, but yeah, go ahead, please.
I'm Judy Meyer from the Hayden Lake area, been on the board a long time. Go ahead, a long time, go ahead.
Michelle, I'm from Chapter.
Regina McCree, and I live in Post Falls. Vanessa Robinson, and I've been on the board for a year and a half.
From where?
Across the river. Coeur d'Alene, Union County. Idaho.
So literally across the river here on the
Yeah.
far side.
Yeah.
the Pretty side.
Pretty sight. Katie Blank, Hayden.
Michelle Beely, Post Falls. Lindsay Miller Escarpole, interim director.
Janelle Sells, business manager.
Okay. So this doesn't say interim, it says assistant, so
I know.
you're misclassified. So, okay.
For the moment.
So this is something that I do frequently. In fact, I'm doing it for tomorrow up in Kellogg. There'd probably be 10 to 15 different public agencies there that I do this for. So, in my far distant past life, I've done a lot of things with ICRIMP. And before that, I was county commissioner up north. And so most of the things or some of the things that we'll talk about today are things that I did and did wrong and got told don't ever do that again. So, but again, questions are okay then. So what is an ICRIM? We are your insurance program, and it is a program, it's member owned. So the district is insured, but also owners. So you're one of about just under 1,000 members we have. We only do local governments and only in Idaho. So it's basically co-op. So you own the program. I'm a public official, public employee as you're not all public employees, but you're public officials. So we are a government entity because we were created initially by counties in mid-1980s when counties couldn't get insurance. Because attorneys discovered that jails were a good place to bring lawsuits against whatever happened there. And so most insurers stopped insuring. So we're an insurance program, but we're a little different. We provide property liability, a lot of specialized coverages that you wouldn't normally find. We do weird things like cyber, which is, I guess that's not so weird. That's a big deal now. Public official bonds. We do actually notary bonds for our members that have notaries. We provide those bonds as well. So we provide a wide variety of coverages within the policy. So we provide basically property liability and weird coverages. One of the things that sets us apart is compared to most insurers, we spend a lot of time and effort and money trying to avoid claims. We do a lot of training. There's about 4 of us that do risk management. So the others do different things than I do. We have an HR person who does HR training. I used to dabble in that, and then they discovered they needed somebody that actually knew what they were talking about. So they have a new person doing that. So mostly I do governance and have for the last couple of years. Questions about what an ICRIM is. So one of the questions that we sometimes get, usually right after one of our members' employees have driven through a stop sign or a stoplight and run into somebody. And they'll call and say, okay, so I know that ICRIM provides coverage for the city or the county or the district, but what about me? And this is language out of our policy that answers that question. So our coverage extends to the named insured, which in your case would be the library district, any employee or volunteer of the named insured, as long as they're acting on behalf of the named insured. So the good news in Idaho is that the Idaho Tort Claims Act, if you're ever bored and need to go to sleep, it's Title 6, Chapter 9, actually provides really good protection for you and for all of us as public officials. Virtually every state has a Tort Claims Act that provides some protection. Idaho's is more protective than many others. And so there's good news and bad news. The good news is you have to be pretty creative to do something related to your job that creates personal civil liability. Bad news is people can do incredibly stupid things and it's not their responsibility. It's the responsibility of the agency that they work for. So that it's kind of a trade-off. So that's kind of all the liability stuff that I was going to cover. Do you have any questions about liability? Okay. All right. So we're going to talk about being a board. So we sort of started off before some of you got here talking about movies, good quality movies like Harry Potter. Are any of you familiar with Aladdin, the old movie Aladdin, the cartoon one? Okay. So you remember what happens when Aladdin rubs a lamp and out pops the genie? And he says a couple of things. One, all the great powers in the universe, little tiny living space. That's exactly the way you are as a board. You have all the power to create policies and direction for the library. The way in which you do that is very, very limited. Your powers are only when you're acting collectively as a body at a meeting, dealing with something that's on the agenda. And really the only power you have other than that is to create liability. And so that your power, you have all the power, but it's limited in terms of how you can use it. So I think that's a good analogy. And the worst thing that a board member can do, and this is not true for libraries, it's true for all boards, is to act individually to do something related to employees. So the board, the board has lots of different roles and rules and powers and responsibilities.
Can we go back to that last thing you said? Because it was like a big deal. And
What last thing I said?
That's fine.
about, yeah,
Acting on your own?
about the worst thing you can do.
First thing that an individual board member can do is get involved in employment issues, but discipline, fire somebody, that's never a board member's job. It's always the board
Well,
as a whole.
I thought the word you used was create liability.
Yes, create liability. Yeah.
And just to kind of expand on that, it's not even directly doing one of those things, but if you have too much involvement with any individual employee, you actually end up opening yourself up to some claim of impropriety, period, right? I mean, I'm thinking of possible, if someone thinks that you're creating a hostile work environment or some sort of harassment.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yes, yeah. Having said that, it's not being involved, it's being involved in an inappropriate manner is what creates a problem. And I'm talking about a broader sense than just the library, but for library board. And libraries and cities, well, schools to a certain extent, are the only members of ICRIMP that actually have a statutory provision for how management shall be done. You know, in cities, the mayor is the kind of the CEO, he's the supervisor, and or the city manager, and city manager cities, then the council is the governing board that's basically legislative, that's policy, budgets, those sorts of things. The only other member we have that's like that is library districts, which have specific roles. The board is primarily a legislative body and not an executive, because you create, the executive is in the library director. Most of our other members, if you look at sewer districts, water districts, highway districts, all those don't have that. The board can be more involved in day-to-day operations than libraries.
Jim,
Did that answer your question?
yeah, I think I was just thinking about that again. An individual governing board member has no authority to supervise fire employees. Are there other things like budgets, if we're working on budgets, where there's some parameters on what we can and cannot do? Now, our main goal is hire a director
Right,
and do budget. Those are, I believe, our two main
right.
operational.
No, I mean, the board as a group sets a budget. I mean, the board as a body sets a
Mhm.
budget. Individual board members can certainly work on the budget. You can bring suggestions, you can work with, look at the, the revenue. And you can even be involved in terms of things like lobbying to help allow you some authority to increase budgets or to change budgets. Or maybe to have funding that's not just property tax. I mean, so individuals can be involved in all of those things. You can't set the budget individually or authorize expenditures individually. Other than that, you can be involved in anything. Budget.
But that brings up the lobbying. If you just identify lobbying,
Right,
something we can do. In this case, we're not funded through the county commissioners. Well, they bless it, but otherwise it's the tax base that we have here. But can we help our legislators think about the value of libraries?
absolutely, you should,
Individual?
you should.
And if we don't agree with what the board is doing on something, how do we individuals deal with our personal beliefs that,
Let's keep that thought for a while and talk about that, because that's a really important
that's a tough thing.
thing, but it's probably maybe more.
That's fine.
If I don't get back to it,
I will.
remind me. So your role in serving the budget is to set the budget. It's approving bills. what my experience from my past life and from watching our members is that so often approving bills gets to be kind of a role thing, you know? And I can tell you that it's a really important function. And your duty when approving bills is not to say, I wouldn't have bought that. Your duty is to assure that the bills that are presented are legitimate charges against the library. Let me give you an example where our board didn't do that well. So we had one of our members in the other end of the state that had an employee who was less than honest, and that it happened to be a school district. They purchased a new pickup. And so everybody knew that the board had approved purchase a new pickup. So the next month after the pickup was purchased, there was a bill for a new pickup and the board approved it, as they should. The following month, because it was one of hundreds, probably literally hundreds of bills that they approved, the following month, there was a bill for a pickup. They still remembered they had the new pickup out in the shop. They didn't remember that they'd already paid for it. And so they approved it again, only this time it didn't go to the dealer, it went to their employee's bank account. That's what your job is to ensure, is this a legitimate charge against the district? Not, I wouldn't have bought that, because that's probably not your role. I mean, I listened to a city argue for 2 meetings in a row over the council disapproved of the mayor had gone out and purchased a vacuum cleaner. And they argued for 2 meetings over that. And it wasn't that they disagreed with the need for it or the price of it. They would have bought a different brand. That's totally not their, I mean, that's a colossal waste of time. That's what you need to not do. If you want a specific brand, then you need to specify that before it's purchased. Actually, probably you need to not do that because that can get you in
That's
trouble.
pretty procedural. That's
Yeah.
pretty-
Making sure your annual audit's done, reviewing the monthly treasurer's report. Because you, like most, the good news for libraries is that your revenue is less flexible than most others. I mean, you rely primarily on property taxes. And that's a fairly stable revenue source. But even given that, it's still, when you set the budget, you're about 16, 17 months out from the end of the fiscal year. And so when you review the treasurer's report, it's not just to see how much did we spend and how much did we bring in, but if we're 50% through the year and we've only received 20% of our anticipated revenue, there's probably a problem. However, your revenue comes in primarily in 2 checks. So if you're a quarter of the way through the year and you haven't received hardly anything, that's not a problem because that's normal. So in reviewing the treasurer's report, you need to see, is our revenue coming in as we anticipated? And you have to have some understanding of what's anticipated because doesn't come in evenly. So personnel management, which is kind of near and dear to our heart, because when we look at the biggest claims we get are related to personnel. Now, that's not the most expensive area overall, but it's still our biggest area is property. So we insure your buildings. We hope they don't burn down. We hope the snow doesn't collapse them, but around the state, there will be several that do. Our recent big one, which was total is going to be close to $3 million, was a fire station that burnt down with all the fire trucks in it because when the firefighters were called and said we had a fire, they couldn't fight it because all the equipment was in the burning building. That's a good example. I mean, that's one of those unique one-off things that just happens. And that's why we have insurance. Help with that, but still, it's costly. You need other policies. Personnel policy is kind of the most important one for us. And so I'm assuming you have one that's tailored after our sample. And we have a sample personnel policy for all our members. There's a specific one for a library district because you are different. You're different in lots of ways, but one of the ways is library district employees are for cause employees by statute, which are pretty much the only ones in the state that are. Schools, more or less, but they have so many pages that you can't know what they are, but other than that, the general rule is employees can be at will, not libraries. Then if you have vehicles, I assume you don't have you don't have a big fleet of vehicles, do you?
Pretty decent.
We have
Yeah.
like 3 large vehicles and
Oh, so you have bookmobiles or something?
yes,
Oh,
and we have
okay.
other vehicles that staff.
Okay, so you need policy on those because you probably don't want employees taking the bookmobiles to the coast on vacation. Though they're big enough, they'd make a nice camper, right? Yeah.
That's got a lot of
Mm-hmm.
lot of read material in them.
There is, yeah. Yeah, if the weather was bad, you could still be occupied, so that, yeah. I mean, that's sort of a outlandish, but common sense is not very common. You need to provide some guidance on who can use them and what they can be used for. On the other hand, there's a tendency sometimes to get a little too tight with that. One of our city members several years ago had in their vehicle policy that no one other than city employees could be in their vehicles. Seems to make sense, right? Except they had a police department. It creates real liability if you handcuff your prisoners to the back and drag them to jail. Of course, you're gonna have other people in there. And at times you should allow other people to drive them, Our policy specifically says authorized drivers.
So, I'm sorry, do we have a strong policy on who can be in or drive the vehicles? I know the big bus, you have to have a certain license,
You have
but
to, right, those you have to have a CDL,
We'll have to look into that.
We have a vehicle policy.
Okay.
Vehicle use policy.
There's a policy, but nobody knows what it is.
Yeah.
Well, it's probably based off the model one that you mentioned earlier.
Well,
Let's hope so.
it's a different policy, but we do have a sample on that too.
Oh,
And it's pretty simple and straightforward. Basically, we want people that know how to drive.
Agreed.
The problem is just having a driver's license doesn't automatically make you a good driver. And it is important to do because you're doing okay, this is a question I shouldn't ask, but you probably, do you have a drug testing policy for CDL drivers?
yes.
Oh, you do? Okay. So how many CDL drivers do you have?
3, 4,
Several, huh?
5,
Okay. I'm surprised at that, but good.
5.
I have a CDL, but because I don't drive a big vehicle, I don't have to have drug tests all the time. Computer usage, and you need more than one computer. I mean, you have a computer policy. I haven't looked, but I'm sure you do for the use of the computers that is accessible by the public. But you also need a computer use policy for those of you that sit in the back room. What you do and don't do on those, and that's pretty basic. So as trustees, you will have from time to time, citizens speak to you about problems with behavior or performance of employees. And so when that happens, your response to them would be, thank you for bringing that to my attention. I'll report it to the appropriate person. The appropriate person would be the library director, because it's unlike other types of districts, the library director is one who's responsible for it. But you are always eyes and ears because people talk to you as they should. You're their elected representative. So these are some of the statutory duties of the board. To establish basic policies, to employ, evaluate, supervise a library director or director team. You're one of the few libraries in the state that has used a director team at times, farthest in the past. I think CUNA does now. As far as I know, they're the only one that does have a director team at this point. Create job descriptions, policies, establish annual budget, oversee the finances. So kind of, if I were to break down the role of the board in 3 words, it's policies, hire and manage a director, and fiscal. And that's kind of pretty much everything you do fits into those three categories. But having said that, those are big categories. There's a lot of it. Yes,
I just want to go back and follow up on something you said a moment ago, because I think it's important. So I just want to underscore it, which is that if an employee approaches us or we learn of something in regards to library operations, not only should we tell the director, but it's incumbent upon us to tell the director, because knowledge by any one of us is essentially knowledge that's imputed to the board, would it not be? And I guess that's what I'm saying, which is
Yeah.
even if it's something that makes you uncomfortable or you don't even really think is a big deal, but if it has come to your attention, then it needs to be directed, passed onward to the director. I
Yeah.
just,
the exception to that is if it's related to the director, then that would be appropriate to bring to the board in executive session. And there are exceptions. I mean, if what's reported has the potential to be criminal behavior, then that's probably something you should report to your attorney. And who's your attorney? Is it Katie.
Katie
Brereton.
Brereton.
So, yeah. The other possibility, and this has actually happened, now hopefully it does never, but if it's serious criminal behavior and you're pretty comfortable with it, because Katie is not the prosecutor, she's your civil counsel, but not legal, not criminal counsel. Things can always be reported to law enforcement or to the prosecutor when there are criminal behaviors. And those generally fall in the rule, I mean, under the embezzlement is kind of the one that we see the most often, that kind of thing.
so let's assume that we do have some information, and I don't. Okay, don't have any information about embezzlement, but let's assume that something came to my attention that made me suspicious for embezzlement. Then I talked to the director about it, and I don't see any, and what, I guess what I'm trying to say is even if you conveyed it to the director, which the buck doesn't necessarily stop there.
Absolutely not,
Okay,
no. Anything like that, I would think you would want to consult with Katie, with your legal counsel. And it needs to not stop there as well. I mean, if there's serious allegations, it needs to be looked into, investigated by someone who's impartial. Probably by someone who's not connected to the library. Because you don't want to be accused of cover-ups, which you will be if you're investigating yourself. So, the library director, buys all the stuff, supervises employees, hires them. And this is the language that, or cause, are the two words that doesn't exist anywhere else for any other units of government, or for any other employers in the state for that matter, unless it's by policy. So the library shall discipline, discharge an employee for cause as necessary. So the cause is different than other types. Basically, what that does is that creates a property right in employment. So in order to take away someone's property, what do you have to do? You have to have a due process. You have to have a due process, which is written into your policy. But that's different than others. Okay, questions about any of that sort of stuff?
What, for cause? What's that? What is for cause? What's considered for cause? Anything that's not, that there,
Basically, anything that's not unlawful to terminate someone for. It could be behavior, it could be performance. It's generally one of those two things.
who gets to decide the behavior?
The library director. Following the policy set by the board. I mean,
Can't be
Your-
musical.
your personnel policy has a whole list of things that would constitute inappropriate behavior.
But the
Or
library
perform-
director themselves would be fired for cause by the
By the
board.
board, yes.
And
And if they disagreed with the cause, what, as was stated,
You know, they will. The reality is that almost, if you look at court cases regarding, unless it's just either unlawful, I mean, you can't fire them for supporting the wrong person for county commissioner. That's unlawful. But unless you come up with an unlawful reason, you can use pretty much any reason you want, as long as it's documented well.
so what protects a director from a board that might want to run them out of town?
Nothing. I mean,
So they could hire an attorney though. Would that, the director could, if they were
Oh.
discharged.
they will, yeah. I mean, we see that all the time, yeah. So the key is to, and I'm gonna get to another little sentence in your policy as well, that if the board fires the director without involving us and allowing us to provide guidance, not to say you shouldn't fire this person. It's almost always the process that is the stumbling block, and so we will help with the process. And if one of our members chooses not to do that, to allow us to assist with the process, and there's a claim, the district gets to pay the first $20,000. So that's kind of a big deal.
Is that
You-
really-
And
It's
I
an
think has
easy-
helped us with at other times with that process.
Sure,
And
we've
it has
always
been-
been available to help. It's just that now we sweeten the pot for you to ask for that help. Actually, we don't sweeten it. We just,
That's what I was thinking.
we kind of do a negative. Yeah,
Deterrent.
yeah, deterrent.
And I'd like to use that for the community college here. What was the situation with the president here at the community college? He was fired by the board,
I don't know all the details, but yeah,
I-
it was,
but that came about for cause or for not cause. Didn't the board end up in trouble because they didn't have a proper?
well,
procedure?
but they don't, for them, they're not for cause by statute.
Therefore, they're free to,
Well, no, not necessarily. They still have to follow their policy. So there's no such thing as free when it comes to employment issues for public employers. It's just that yours is a little more specific because you have to have a due process. Which is not a big deal. It's just allow people an opportunity to tell their side of the story. That's what due process is, an opportunity to be heard. Okay, meetings. So why do we have meetings other than just because they're so much fun? Well, it's to conduct business. The chairman conducts a meeting, but unlike the mayor at city council meetings, the chairman is a full participating member. And should vote, deliberate, technically can make motion. Most chairmen don't. I'm guessing you don't make a lot of motions, do you?
come motion.
I was gonna ask about that today, like why,
Yeah.
if you could, or if that's. not-
Yeah, there's nothing that prevents that.
She
So,
asks for them a lot.
yeah, that's the normal role of a chairman.
But you've been known to
So-
do commotion.
So I was doing actually a class for library, it was a library district far away south of here several years ago, and the chairman was so excited that when they got to the end of the meeting, she made the motion to adjourn, and she thought that was so much fun. I guess if that's fun, then you must live in a quiet community. So, yeah, the chairman is a full participating member. Unlike the mayor, doesn't get a second vote to break a tie. So if there were just four of you here and there's a tie, 2-2, the motion fails. Controls public input and controls board member input, hopefully with the help of staff, keep things on track. Because when you're at a meeting, you're talking about something that's on the agenda. It's really easy for the discussion to sway into pretty soon you're something totally unrelated. it's primarily the role of the chairman to jerk you back into discussion of what the agenda topic was. Because you can, be violating the open meeting law by being deliberating toward a decision that wasn't on the agenda if you escaped from the agenda topic. Prohibit personal attacks and discussions of things that are not before. So the staff is really key to avoiding violating the open meeting law. Prepares, disseminates information, takes minutes, record if you choose to record. I'm assuming you record your meetings.
Yes.
Answer questions, can provide reports on their area. Almost always you would have a report from your director. And maybe from others as well. So when you have a meeting, it's to conduct business, to gather input that's needed, wanted, sometimes unneeded and unwanted. But it's important to recognize that under the open meeting law, public meetings in Idaho are spectators. The only people with the right to participate are those of you who are elected to participate. Then others can as you invite them, and you can invite them in a variety of ways, and we'll talk about that when we get to agendas. How do you invite people to participate? So what is a valid governing board decision? It's made at a posted meeting with a quorum present. It's on the agenda identified as an action item. There's a motion made and an affirmative vote, and it's in the minutes. Those are the four things necessary to have a valid governing board decision. So you do something that's not there. So what do you do that is not there in that process? When you have a motion, what do you do next? Second.
Oh, yeah,
So I'm not suggesting you don't make seconds, but if you don't, it doesn't matter. And the reason I bring this up is I was at a city a few months ago where they had a motion and then they got into discussing it. Finally, the mayor called for vote. They voted on it at the end. They said, oh, we didn't have a second. Well, if you're later listening to the recording and you didn't have a second, it doesn't matter. The reason you have a second is to say, is there someone interested in this other than the person who made the motion? And the fact that it's on the agenda kind of takes the place of that. So I'm not suggesting you don't do seconds if you'd feel awkward to skip it, but it's not a requirement unless you've adopted rules requiring it yourself. So what is not a decision is polling the board. Gathering signatures, you can all sign something individually. That doesn't mean it's a valid governing board decision. Just means you violated the open meeting. Maybe. If it's made at an improperly posted meeting. So if the meeting wasn't posted. One of the questions yesterday in the webinar that I did. Somebody said, well, what if the person who was supposed to put it on the website didn't get it on there? Or didn't get it on there in time? The answer is stop it. When you find out, you stop the meeting and reschedule. If it's made without an agenda topic identified as action item. That's been the law now for 3.5 years. Or if it's not valid, if deliberations occurred outside of the meeting. So if a quorum of the board deliberated or to discuss to deliberated outside of a meeting, then that's not a valid decision. For you with a 5-member board, there could be there's a trick thrown in there too. So technically, if 2 of you were talking about an item that was going to be on the agenda, not really ethical, but not a violation of the open meeting, not a technical violation. However, if then the next day or later, either of you talk to another board member, even though you weren't together at the same time, you've now had a quorum deliberating toward the decision, even though you weren't together at the same time. It's called a serial meeting, so you have to be careful about that. So the answer is really simple, just do your deliberation at the meeting.
Before you leave that one, Jim, we had a dinner when our director left, all together.
Sure.
I don't know, do we need to post the fact that don't have an agenda? We're doing a dinner,
No.
social event.
You do not. It's not a problem for you to be together.
Okay.
The problem is if you're talking about, what do you think we ought to do about this decision coming up? That's the problem. Sometimes it happens. I would confess to violating the open meeting law only once. And it was a conscious decision. So I said that I was a county commissioner, so quorum is 2, so that's pretty easy. So the math is so simple, I can do it. So, we were always accused of making decisions in the restroom. Well, we did once. So there was a crotchety old guy from Priest River that I served with for, he was a commissioner for a total of 18 years. And so, we were literally in the restroom, and he said, and the third commissioner was the chairman. And he hated to make a decision. He loved being a chairman because the decision was already made, right? And so Harold turned to me and he said, so we've got this next issue coming up. He said, how are you gonna vote? I said, I don't know. It doesn't matter. We just have to make a decision. Whether it's yes or no, doesn't matter much. He said, okay, so here's what we're gonna do. You're gonna vote yes, and I'm gonna vote no, and we'll make the third one. So we decided how we were gonna vote outside of the meeting. So that would be a violation. Statute of limitations is run, all the witnesses have passed away, so I think I'm safe. So it's important to have some guidelines for meetings and hearings. And this is here because I'm talking to library people and I don't want to be accused of stealing other people's work. So these are rules that were taken from the city of Rigby. Because you're not a city, they don't work for you. So I have redone the Rigby rules to make them a sample that might work for you. And I assume you have some of these rules. So in your public, when you allow the public to comment, you have time limit, 3 minutes. Okay. Rigby had 5, that's too long. The next one is really important to us because it gets expensive if you don't follow that. At an open meeting, there should never be allowed discussion about the behavior or lack thereof, or performance or lack thereof, of any employee or volunteer. Now, it really shouldn't be about the trustees either. But as trustees, you know, you're a political being. You don't always look in the mirror every morning and say, oh, I'm a politician, but guess what? Congratulations, you are. That's what the definition is, an elected official, and you are. So it's not as costly if there's complaints about you, but even then, that should be cut off as quickly as possible. Someone has serious complaints, there's ways to file that other than at open meeting. The next one is for your protection. There may be some issues that come up that you've been there, done that, already decided it, and you're not wanting to hear about it for a while. So you don't have to hear about the same issue over and over again at every meeting. It's what we call a colossal waste of time. So the last 6 years that I was in office as a commissioner, we had a group from a far part of the county that attended every meeting, and they were really good about coming to meeting. There was an issue that they were concerned about. We talked about it. We'd gone down and looked at it. We'd hired engineers to look at it, and it was something we didn't have the power to change. But yet they wanted to talk about that issue all the time. And so it got to where I would say to them, I see you're here. Do you have anything you want to say other than this issue? And they generally say no. Sometimes they had something else to bring up, but we didn't have them repeat that issue, you know, every time for 6 years. About 8 years after I was out of office, when I was working for ICRIMP, actually, I attended a meeting of the board there, and the same group was at that meeting 14 years after it started, wanting to talk about the same thing, but again, they didn't because they'd already been there, done that. So it's fine for you to say, you know, we'd appreciate not people bringing up the same thing every time. It's just, it doesn't gain it. And the last one is
Can
probably.
I stop you there?
Yes.
So we don't have that in our policy. I'm just saying
Yeah,
that because we do have
some themes.
exactly that. And I can't imagine the reaction from the public if all of a sudden Katie's like, hey, we already heard this. So I'm just wondering what you're thinking about that, Katie.
Me? Well, I was gonna ask some questions when he was done
Okay.
about it.
So, first of all, you don't want to talk about it now because it's not on your agenda. Because this would be a rule you would do. So here's what my suggestion would be. I mean, if you're interested at all in adopting the rules like this or anything else, that you would put it on the agenda. And so people would be there when you discuss it, so it wouldn't be a surprise to them. And then secondly, if you, whatever rules you have, need to be available for them to see. So when I went to Rigby, they had a big, I mean, it was big print on the side of the chamber, the council chambers. Other places I've seen that have adopted rules for hearings and meetings, and they can be the same. So you could use the same rules like for budget hearing. And they put it on the back, like they'll provide a copy of the agenda for every person who comes, and they'll put that on the back. So it should not be a surprise to people. I mean, that would be the worst thing you could do. And you may not want to do that at all, just because Rigby thought it was a good idea, doesn't mean you need.
Right, I wasn't advocating for or against it, I'm
Yeah.
just curious.
But you're right, if you are going to adopt something, how you go into that is really critical. So be thoughtful about how you get from here to there. The last one, however, is kind of a given. That if someone brings up a topic as a member of the public comment that requires board action, and most of the time it does not, but if it's something that does, because it's so hard to ignore a question, you need to have it in writing that if this requires board action, we want to take it up, we'll put it on a future agenda, but we can't make a decision on it now because it would be an invalid decision because it's not on the agenda. And so if somebody does bring up something, and occasionally they do, I mean, there are things that are brought up that make sense. So then you can do that.
So my question was, these are suggestions, is that correct? They're not from no,
City of Rigby made it up. I shared them with you. So
okay,
these I made up because I
okay.
took it from them.
So in answer to you, Vanessa, I am not in a million years would I tell people, we've already heard that before, not to this crowd.
Yeah,
And I really like Jim's suggestion that if we are getting to the point where we are hearing this over and over and over again, then we would want to change our policy at a public meeting.
Oh, absolutely. It's not a policy unless you do that.
My daughter works for the the district where Vancouver, Washington Library, and she works in the downtown library. And that district had heard from a certain group concerning drag queen story time for every meeting for 3 years. And they finally said, they hadn't had it, they weren't planning on having it, nothing was happening about it, and they finally said, we will not be letting you talk about this at a public, and that was the first time I'd heard that.
Yeah.
That certainly was, there was no plans and that they'd not had it, they weren't going to have it, there's no
Yeah,
plans,
and
so,
Yeah, so that might be a good example. I
yeah.
mean, I stepped into something, the first city that I did a presentation after I'd seen this from Rigby, it was actually Emmett. And I kind of walked into one there. I said, for instance, if you've been dealing with chickens for the last 2 years and you're tired of chickens, you finally adopted something. What I didn't realize is that they had the meeting before they'd been dealing with chickens. What is a chicken? Or, I mean, this is a big deal to cities. What's a chicken? And how many can you have? And is a rooster a chicken?
That's right.
And so, that was a good example. They knew what I was talking about, but they'd listened to public comment all over the place for several months. They'd arrived at a decision. They'd put it in their ordinance and they wanted to let the ordinance work. They didn't want to hear about chickens for a while. That's okay. So there's a personal story about chickens. It's kind of an aside, but I'm up here so I get to do that.
You
So-
ruffle a lot of feathers.
You've all heard of unintended consequences. So one of the unintended consequences of the rules that many cities have for chickens is you can't have a rooster. Well, when you buy little baby chicks, you don't always know until you start to hear them, you know, making the rooster noise. And so what do you do with them then? Well, they're already pets, so you can't eat them. So you take them out to the McNall Ranch, which is kind of a remote place, and you turn them loose at the end of the driveway. Over the last 3 years, there've been about a dozen of those turned loose out in the ranch up there. There's the rest of the story, but that's too bad.
You ate them.
What?
You ate them.
No, we did not eat any.
Came home to roost.
I suspect they did actually catch one. Then my other brother-in-law decided that
Oops.
that poor rooster that they caught needed some company, so he brought some hens over and then renamed their house the Grouse Creek Chicken Farm. Okay, that's
On your
totally unrelated.
On your second line, trustee encourages trustee participation.
So I put that in there on purpose.
It worked.
See if somebody
It worked.
pick it up. Thank you. I had never seen that. I'll do that. I'll change that before Monday because I'm doing another one Monday.
Okay. Virginia usually does that. I got it this time. Okay.
So the chairman conducts a meeting, encourages participation. What I mean by that is my experience in watching boards is that sometimes people who say the least have the most to say, if you know what I mean. And I think that if you're talking about, if you're talking about approving the agenda, well, not the agenda, the minutes or something simple, then it doesn't matter. But if you're really talking about policies that carry a lot of weight, I think it's really important to hear from every trustee. And it's appropriate for the chairman to say, what are your thoughts on this before you get to the voting? And so that's what I mean by that. Controls public input, keeps the discussion to the agenda topic, and prohibits personal attacks. So one of the most frustrating things for public when they come to a meeting or especially a hearing is they don't understand the process. So I think if you have new people who haven't been to a meeting before, it's helpful to go through and say, we're here to conduct business. These are the items we have on the agenda. We will not be taking public input until we get to this section, or we'll be taking public input on this topic. And then we have a, kind of a general public input, however you manage your agendas. Let people know when their time is to do something, or there may be meetings where you're not taking any public input. And it's important for people to know that. So explain the process. What are you doing at this meeting? There may be a time when things get a little out of control. And one of the best tools is just take a break. I had a call from a chairman of an irrigation district from the other end of the state. And those of you up here don't realize, but in Idaho, whiskey is to drink and water is to fight over. And so irrigation districts don't always have board members that see eye to eye on where the water should go. And that was the case in this one. And so the chairman called me and said, the last two meetings, we've not gotten anything done because it just gets, conflict to where it's ineffective. What would you recommend? I said, well, there's not a magic answer, but I said, just try this. He said, when things start to go off the rails a little bit, just bang your gavel, get up and say, we're taking a break. And this was not citizens, this was people that were on the board. And he said, we did that. I walked outside and walked around and came back. He said, 10 minutes later, we came back, called it to order. He said, the people because nobody went, they all went to the meeting with the best of intentions to get things done. And he said, they felt a little embarrassed. And he said, they didn't agree. They're never going to agree on certain things. But he said, the rest of the meeting was civil and we got through our agenda and we got things decided. So sometimes that can help. The last one is, don't be stuck with your agenda looking the same every time. Arrange your agenda in a manner that makes sense for you and for the public. I mean, there may be things that you may have, some meetings you may have on the agenda. You think, boy, we're never going to get through all this. There may be some things on there you don't have to decide at that meeting. Put them down at the bottom or skip over them as you go.
So, just because we've always done it this way doesn't mean you have to do that. If you have, like, if you're looking at a project and you have engineers or architects or other professionals that are coming to present, put them first. You're paying them by the hour. Don't have them sit through your whole meeting. So feel free to arrange the agenda in any way that works for you and the public. There's not, you don't have to do old business, new business, and probably should. So the definitions in the open meeting law are the key to compliance. Governing board's pretty simple. That's you. It's also any group of two or more other than staff that you appoint to make a recommendation. So you may have an issue, you come up and you say, you've got some citizens that are interested in something. You may want to ask a couple of citizens to work with a couple of board members to bring a recommendation to you. You just created a new governing board. That's a committee, that's a governing board. They have to follow the same open meeting rules as you do. Open meeting, public records, conflicts of interest, all of those things are the same. So meeting's pretty simple, just getting together. Decision is a motion and a vote. The one that's different than what I think about is deliberation. When somebody says, we deliberated about that, I think that means that they talked back and forth and shared ideas. Under the open meeting law, deliberation is defined as a receipt or exchange of information or opinion relating to a decision. So you may you may sit in the back and listen to somebody talk about what's coming up, and you may have deliberated toward that decision. So you don't have to be an active participant to deliberate toward a decision. It's more critical for cities and counties when they get involved in the planning process, because that's a more defined process, but it's still true of all of you. So you don't have to engage in a discussion back and forth to have deliberated toward a decision. So meeting notices, this is the easy part. Your staff does this. Regular meetings, posted 5 days, physical and electronic. So anyone who has a website or a social media site is required to post their regular meetings. And I assume you have a regular meeting schedule that you do, right? And you just leave that up all the time? Or do you set it for a year and do it kind of a year at a time? So if you put it up a year at a time, then you've always got the 5 days there. Special meetings, 24-hour notice. Right on that, I think.
Yes.
What's it, or 48?
What? The 48 is for public libraries, meaning city libraries. The statute specifically says you can call a meeting in 24-hour notice, but you're required to notify the trustees 48 hours. So that's what 48. I think it only applies to public city library trustees. And then emergency meetings, you can have at any time with no advance notice, with just a good faith effort to notify each of the governing board members and any members of the press who've asked to be notified, which is 0. Used to be the press attended meetings, they don't anymore.
So, the posted, is the full agenda supposed to be posted 5 days in advance for a regular meeting?
Yes,
Is that what we're talking
no,
about?
the meeting notice,
Just,
that you're
just
gonna have a
that we're
meeting.
gonna have a meeting, but the agenda is something else.
the agenda,
It is a little,
it's the next slide.
okay.
So the agenda is posted the same, meaning you have to physically post it and it has to be posted electronically,
So 5 days.
48 hours.
Oh,
So, yeah, so the agenda itself
The
doesn't have to be-
agenda is 2 days.
but like we have a list of our meetings and that can be posted.
Yeah, so
Do we
you
have it-
put
do we have
that
it
up.
posted?
Yes,
Okay.
I mean, it's on here, so I assume it's on your website and it's on
in the building.
in the building, so yeah.
oh, so the same as meeting notice, you mean like what
I
meeting
mean,
it's on?
by the same as meeting notice, I mean, it has to be posted physically and electronically. And 24 hours for a special meeting because of special meeting notice. So the meeting if you're having a special meeting, normally the notice and the agenda are the same piece of paper. You can amend the agenda with a good faith reason at the meeting. Good faith reason means it just came up, wasn't our fault, and it doesn't affect the public.
So were
You know,
we in, so did we follow that for our adding action item to our executive session?
You did not.
Ah,
You do not have action item on your executive session.
you don't have to have one, you don't have to have it?
No, if you're gonna take action, you do. But when you added it, you didn't add it in a manner that would be valid.
Oh, I see, okay.
Because it's to add action item, you must specify what the reason is, and it must be an emergency.
And I made the motion. Thanks, Katie.
So why wouldn't that be and considered an emergency?
Because nobody's gonna die. Nobody's gonna get sick. I mean, emergency means loss of property or health.
But I thought also, Jim, that if you learned something new that you didn't know until an hour before the meeting, therefore it was an emergency situation.
Right. Yeah,
Whatever
yeah,
emergency
something
was.
just happened. That's because things do
New
happen.
information.
Yeah,
So is an executive session itself always an action item? I mean, what if no action is going to come from the executive session? The fact that you posted an executive session, that you're going to go into executive session, but you can't actually go into executive session?
you can go into executive session, but you can't make a decision when you come out.
Okay, that's what I'm thinking, because because on our agenda, we clearly indicated that we would go into executive session, but we wouldn't be able to take any action related to.
We never take
executive
action in
session.
executive session.
But
I know,
afterward-
but sometimes you would, sometimes you would when you come out. I thought that's what you're doing tonight. That was,
No,
oh, I get it. This was to go into executive
it
session.
was just because I thought it needed to be added there for, I couldn't remember.
It probably should be there, but it's not a big deal because you've got an executive session and that's not a, going into executive session requires a motion, but it's not really an action.
Right. Okay.
I don't know what it is.
But that's why I brought it up, because you're not actually taking any action. other
I
than-
misunderstood. I thought you were adding a line saying action item if you need to take action based on what you discussed. Okay.
No, no.
So I think that probably adding it wasn't accurate, but the fact that it's not there probably doesn't make a difference.
Okay.
But I would put it on in the future. Anytime you have, it, because you are making a motion in open session.
So is it safe to always have action item at the end of executive session on the agenda?
I guess I was assuming that we had to have action item on anything we would vote on.
That's the
Mhm.
best course of action, but you vote on during the meeting and you don't have as action item.
We do.
Oh, you do? You don't?
Yeah, right there.
Okay, you
Yep,
do.
we do.
right. But
Yeah.
if you didn't, it didn't make a difference. When you get up and leave, the meeting's adjourned. Because it's not you're not taking.
But a standard rule of thumb would be you just put action item after everything that might require a vote,
Absolutely.
you know,
And I
so,
think would be my suggestion.
yeah,
Whether or not we take the action. that's further
Right.
on.
right,
Yeah,
we don't
you-
have to.
The fact that it says action item doesn't require you to.
Okay.
Well, and it's helpful for the public to
Mhm.
understand that there will be a vote. This
It
is
could
not
be.
just a discussion.
Mhm,
There is the potential for a vote.
Potential for a vote. Doesn't mean there will be a vote.
Yes,
mhm.
If in doubt, always put it on.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't have it on, then you can't do it.
Then we're fine.
we've done that a couple of times this year and it's a drag.
To do what?
Not-
We've forgotten to put action item after
Oh.
something we did want to vote on and we had to wait until the next meeting.
Yeah. Now, if it's something that's time specific, you can remember 40 or 24 hours, you can call a special meeting and just decide that issue.
Okay, yeah, that's true. That's a good idea.
So when you look at the agenda, rather than a list of things we're going to talk about and look at it as your promise to the public that you're not going to talk about anything else, it kind of puts a different flavor on it. And that's really what it is. That's why I should look at it. Amending the agenda should be very, very rare. So you can vote any way you want with two exceptions. You can't vote by secret ballot, but any other way you can. Stand up, sit down, say yes, say no, say whatever. But you're required to have a roll call vote to go into executive session. And a roll call vote anytime any member requests. So it's an automatic right. So if someone says, I'd like a roll call vote, you don't deliberate it, you don't ask why, it's just an automatic right on any issue. So the statute requires that this be in the minutes, which of you are present, any final decisions and results of all votes.
So what, could we go back to that slide again? I'll vote on the request of a member, the vote of each member by name. Okay,
So
That's the same
roll
thing.
call, so this is where it's in the minutes section that it says any member may request a roll call. Yes,
Just for your presentation on Monday, to go back one slide, should it all be ROLL?
Where are you, Rochelle?
it should be. Thank you.
Nice.
See,
Where are
this
you?
was a trial run because I knew I'd get it all right. So yeah, thank you. You're right. Right direction? Yeah. So your minutes should always reflect what happened, not what you wished had happened. I've seen that attempted. The minutes are creating the history. So my suggestion is that minutes should have enough detail that someone 20 years from now knows what you did and why you did. That's the goal. I generally recommend that minutes not be a transcript or even close to that. And when someone says, I demand that this be in the minutes, they can demand, but it's not a right of anyone to have anything in the minutes other than the motions.
You're
And
talking about the trustees or the audience? Or
Both.
Okay.
both. But usually the audience, trustees. What, the important things that the trustees do are in the minutes, like, when you make the decisions. And your summary of the discussions. But I don't think it needs to say this person said this and this person said this. Minutes pertaining to executive session are the reason to go in, specific statutory authority, and then the one-line reason. Going into executive session, one of the few places that requires more than a simple majority, it's a 2/3 majority. Which for most boards doesn't make any difference. For your board, it does. 3 is a majority. It takes 4 to be a 2/3 majority if you're all here. If you are not all here, so let's say there were 3 of you present at a meeting, that's a quorum. You can conduct business. There's a question as to whether or not you can go into executive session. So 3 or 4 years ago, West Ada School District had two vacant positions. So they had 3 trustees out of the 5. And the Attorney General's opinion was that they could not go into executive session because they didn't have 2/3 of the full board,
Full board.
of the full board.
Full board.
I think he was wrong. But who are you gonna listen to? The Attorney General of the state of Idaho or me, some schmuck who walked in off the street?
you, I wouldn't listen to you.
So my point is, if you have 3 votes, I would be asking Katie whether or not that was a legitimate executive session. Because whatever she says will give you protection. Whatever I say doesn't matter. Now, my guess is that that's very seldom the issue that you have.
And I was just
But
wondering why somebody wouldn't. Why would somebody not want to go into executive session?
because they don't want to, they don't want to talk, they want to get into the discussion.
Okay.
Um,
You want the issue to
Usually,
be public.
Oh, that
you-
makes sense. Yep.
usually the issue is more, you only had 3 here to conduct the meeting. So you didn't have, in which case, 2 would be 2/3 of the present, but not 2/3 of the whole board. The reason I think that the Attorney General is wrong is because in the case of appointed city officials, the statute actually says of the full council. So they know how to put those words in there if they meant it. Most common reasons: selection, discuss litigation with your attorney, discuss claims with your risk manager or a representative of your insurer. So who has a right to be there is the governing board members and anyone else that you wish to be there. So you may want some staff there. Well, your library district. So there's one other exception. For library districts, and again, you're unique in this, the statute says that the library director should be in executive sessions unless the library director is the topic of the discussion. So, and actually, that's something that I recommend boards, at least once a year, you should have executive session to discuss and allow the trustees the opportunity to discuss their perception of how the trust or how the director is doing. In a perfect world, you'd be doing a formal evaluation, but we don't, most of us live in a perfect world, so.
We do pretty well.
Mhm.
We have it on our board calendar and
So your world's more perfect.
we are quite perfect, yeah.
So you can conduct meetings via telephone. We've all experienced that in the last 2 years. Someone has to be there. So one of your administrative
And
staff.
does this include, online meetings, Zoom meetings as well? Are these the same one? Okay.
Oops, somebody didn't shut their phone off. I should, if I were at other meetings, I'd be getting fined $10 for that. Other meetings do that. So there's some penalties. Remember at the beginning, I said you're really well protected from personal civil liability. This isn't civil liability, so this is out of your pockets. So the goal is just don't get there. Generally, unless you do something intentional, you're not gonna be fined those, but actually, I'm not aware of any board in the state of Idaho that has paid those fines since they were amended for inflation.
Who charges them? Who charges you?
County prosecuting attorney.
Oh,
So if it's a county board of commissioners, it would be the attorney general. For all other local governments, it's a county prosecutor. Now, there have been some boards that have been bad or been accused of being bad and that have had worse than this. So there was a highway district, I got a call from the prosecutor. He said, I have some complaints about the highway district not complying with the open meeting law. I says, I kind of looked at it and it doesn't look like it's anything serious, but I don't want to just ignore it. So rather than just fine them, because I don't think that'd stick because it was pretty nominal violations. But he said, would you be willing to get down to a class? So rather than just pay $250, they had to listen to me for 2 hours. So there are other penalties. Difference between a meeting and a hearing. Meeting, the public has a right to come and listen to you. Hearing, they have a right to participate as long as they stick to the topic. So at a budget hearing, people could come and talk about the budget. That doesn't mean they can talk about other things totally unrelated to the budget. Having said that, there isn't much that isn't related to the budget. Because it is appropriate at a budget hearing for people to talk about programs that they would like to see instituted or ones that they would not. I mean, it's kind of the budget is a pretty broad category, Jim. Questions about meetings? You're gonna like this next section. It's really short. This is the role of the board, designated custodian or custodians. Establish a fee schedule. I assume you've done both of those. Are you custodians?
Same.
Just one?
oh, this is designated custodian for the public records?
Yes.
Oh, you're the custodian?
Yeah.
Oh, poor thing.
And you may want to consider with the size of your agency, you may want to consider an alternate. Well, just in case you ever were not here today. I mean, that's probably not gonna happen, but if it did, somebody else. Provide access to legal counsel, which you've done. I've added that because I've had some boards that say we don't want to spend money on attorneys, so nobody can talk to the attorney unless we give them authorize it. Well, that's really stupid. And then adopt the records retention policy, which is not really, it's still public records, but in a perfect world, and again, you may live closer to that perfect world than most of our members, your records retention policy should be a records destruction policy. So if your policy says, we're gonna keep the bills, the actual invoices for 7 years, at the end of 7 years, they ought to go away. And also there's a lot of records you keep forever. Meeting minutes, agendas, building plans, those sorts of things that you can.
So the fee schedule is for public records. The fee schedule is for people who request public records. We've
Yes.
had people request, is ours 100 pages? Is it the first 100 pages?
First page, 100 pages is free because the statute says so.
Oh, because the statute says that.
Yes.
And then after that, I know you had a lot.
Before you leave that, without the records retention, can that be electronic records? No.
Absolutely, yes. So ethics and conflicts. Some of the things we see that are unethical, harassment, releasing public records from people who shouldn't, and not releasing public records for people who should. That second one is kind of it's a challenge for libraries. Because most libraries they have a variety of staff, and then they also use a lot of volunteers. You have volunteers and pages and other kinds of things.
We don't have volunteers that directly interact with our customers. It's not like they're issuing library cards at some smaller libraries.
But the reason I bring this up is this is an area that requires some training before the first day on the job, because the perception of most of the public is a public record is anything you have, and anything you have I can see. And we all know that's not true. Everything you have is a public record if it's about the conduct or administration of the public's business. That doesn't mean it's available to the public.
So what about our board packet? When we get our board packet? Is that a public record? Are we allowed, do we share it with the public? Is that, I mean, like, can I show it to somebody else?
Sure.
Okay, so that's not a public record in the same way.
It is a public record.
Okay, but it doesn't have to have a public records request.
You mean whether or not you want to do that without it, but the things you do connected to your meeting are the most highly public records that there are. So, yeah. Now, I'm assuming that you don't get things like if you're going to have an executive session, anything about that other than the agenda, right? I mean, you don't say, we need to talk to this person because they've been bad. That wouldn't be in your packet, right?
No, I don't think so.
As long as it's general stuff, that's available.
But I think if we we had something written, for example, about our, like, evaluating the director or something, but I don't think we ever.
That shouldn't go out in a packet. No, that shouldn't be talked about outside of executive session.
Is our agenda is posted ahead of time on our website.
Yes.
Are all the materials within the agenda posted?
No.
No, generally you wouldn't be posting the board packet. And do you post your minutes afterwards, after they're approved?
Yeah. And the video recording.
What about drafts? Drafts that have not, and I'm thinking of draft policies that staff have created. They've not been board approved. So oftentimes the board's never even seen it before.
Right.
I mean, I get that it's a public record, but I guess I'm wondering, is that a public record that would be subject to or would be given out of a board packet? I don't know. Just can you speak to drafts?
It probably would if somebody requested it. They probably would have a right to get them. Yeah, unless it's specifically exempted from disclosure, then it should be disclosed. Having said that, it's a pretty long list of things that must be or may be refused for public disclosure. Because I've seen public records requests for all kinds of things. We had an inmate request the blueprints of the jail.
That's a good idea.
Oh.
And believe it or not, in the 20-some pages of fine print, public agencies need not disclose it doesn't say blueprints, the design documents. So if somebody wants the blueprints of this building, they don't have a right to it.
Well, and I think that's one reason why, and I'll point to you, Judy in particular, is always very meticulous about, are we looking at a draft? Are we looking at, is this a board approved? And I think that's very important, because if it is given to the public and it is a draft, then it needs to be clearly marked that it's a draft. And
Yeah.
once something's been approved, then I know our staff is very good about this is approved, and it generally has
Yeah,
an approved
so-
date on it.
You bring a good point, because one of the things that we frequently see requested are the draft minutes before they're approved. Well, we have a little court case out of Montgomery County that makes it clear that those are available to the public. But when they're given out, they should be stamped draft, so people know that they haven't been approved by the board yet. But they're still available to the public, whatever draft you have.
And Amy had said that the library reports, because there's pictures of children in there, that those should not be there.
So you do have to be careful about pictures with children, and I don't. So the reports, are they being given to the board
Yes, in our packets.
in your packets? If those are not to be shared, then I wouldn't put them in, I wouldn't put it in the packet. That's a real awkward thing, because, somebody can come in and take a picture. But yeah, if the library's putting out pictures, that can be a problem. So the correct answer is, this is something you should discuss with people that are smarter than me. But I would, just because of that content, I would probably send out words and not pictures. I wouldn't include the pictures in a draft, in a staff. I don't think it's necessarily gonna cause a lot of problem, but it potentially could.
To follow up on the agenda and packet. If the packet doesn't go out to the public, they see the agenda. Topics are there. But the material that we're going to be discussing having to do with that topic is not available to the public until they come to the meeting, because it's not been included in the posting of the packet. I'm just thinking through.
If someone came into the office and said, I'd like to see what the board received, they should be given it.
Sure, I think we would respond. I'm just thinking about our responsibility to the public to know what we're thinking about, or talking about, or we're looking at as a draft, preparing to do something with it. Do we need to provide that information in our packet to the public so they know what we're thinking about? And if they're in the
No,
law, it just may be something we.
Not unless they request it.
But they
Are you
will
getting
request
to,
it.
are you getting to the point of whether or not that should be posted on your website?
Mhm.
I mean, the board could discuss that. It's
It's not a law.
it's not a law, and it's kind of fleeting, because, it's good for 2 days and it's not. I don't know that putting it there. I mean, it's certainly an option for the district to do if you choose to. I don't know that it would be that useful generally.
Well, my experience with the NIC board is that packet is online, and I can go to the agenda, and I can then go to whatever topic they're gonna be talking about, and I can read through it, thinking about.
Yeah.
What they're thinking about. What do I
There's
wanna think
nothing
about?
wrong with doing that at all.
I don't know if it's helpful, the whole purpose of our effort here is outreach and communication with the public, transparency, all the
Yeah.
buzzwords. Versus if it's electronic, it doesn't cost me
Yeah,
other than time to enter it all.
And I could see an advantage of posting information about what you're gonna be discussing.
Right,
You may end up creating sometimes some unnecessary conflict when you put drafts out that somebody
Yeah,
does that
my
you're
concern,
not gonna,
yeah.
that you're not gonna do
Right.
anyway,
they got
so.
all the Twitter and it's not gonna happen. But we didn't also hear from them about what they're worried about in that draft that we didn't think of.
Yeah.
So, I
So
don't know.
that's an interesting question.
Well, it's housekeeping for our board then. It's not a law that we need to worry about.
Not a law that you need to do that, no, absolutely. So failure to step down when you have a conflict. Stealing public funds, we're generally opposed to that because it costs us. And people go to jail for that. Presenteeism, you can't be by violating that. You all know what presenteeism is. So presenteeism, you all know what absenteeism is when your employees don't show up for work. Presenteeism is when they show up and spend all day on social media. Which is kind of a big deal now.
Yeah.
So wait a minute, they come to work, but they're not actually.
present at
working,
work.
they're just-
but
Yes,
they're,
this is a word I made up. It's descriptive. Don't write this down. I forget where I'm at. It's a sniglet. Do you know what a sniglet is?
no,
I'm guessing that somewhere out there you have the book of, have you ever run into the book of sniglets? It's a dictionary of sniglets. A sniglet is a word that isn't but should be,
I got
like presenteeism or aquadextrous or Fenderberg. And you all know what those are, right?
aquadextrous.
That's someone who turns off the shower with their feet.
Oh, like I know that.
And Fenderberg is those chunks of ice that fall off the semis we have to dodge on the freeway. So
Oh,
those are
that's
Fenderbergs.
perfect.
So now you know, anyway.
We know what you do in your spare time. That's what we know.
So you're saying I may have been guilty of presenteeism?
Yes.
Probably so, but not on those. That was, I actually had a little booklet of sniglets one time. It was kind of fun.
I suspect our library will be able to find something.
Okay,
But go back to presenteeism, because, you know, it's a made up word, but it's a real issue.
it is a real issue, yeah.
As you watch boards and see who's there and who's not. physically
Well,
at
and
home.
I'm thinking it's less of an issue for boards than it is, it's really an employee issue. And it's certainly a concern with many now with the, people working from home. So my experience with my coworkers, when they're working at home, they're easier to get a hold of. I mean, when they're in the office, they're all around, wandering around and they're talking to somebody and they're in meetings. When they're working from home, when they're working remote, I can get a hold of every employee easily, my coworkers. So there are advantages. What they're doing when they're sitting by the phone, that's a whole different topic. So conflict of interest is when something you do in your public life affects your private financial benefit or detriment. You can't be involved in a contract with the library. So you get your exorbitant salary and that's it, or stipend and that's it. So do you get a stipend, I assume?
We get these three, Hershey Kiss.
Bottle of water and 3 chocolates.
And you're reporting at the IRS, right?
We don't get, well, we took away fines. We used to be exonerated from fines, but now we don't fine anybody, so there's no benefit.
It's all the fun you get to have. So this is a big deal in Idaho because we've had numerous elected officials or people elected who's after they got elected and discovered, oh, I'm gonna lose the business of the city or the county or the district. They said, I can't afford to do that. I know one gentleman who was elected. I want to say last fall, but it was, 2019 or 2021. That had a contract with the city where he was elected to the council. And that contract netted him $29,000 to his pocket. He had to give up one of the others. He chose to give up the contract.
Oh,
Most wouldn't. But he still made an ethical decision. He knew he couldn't do both and he did that. Another small mayor, same election. 21, mayor of a small town who had he had a contracting company. He had some specialized equipment and there occasionally something would happen at their wastewater plant that he was the only one that had equipment they could reach out to get what needed to be done. And he'd done that for years and he said, so I can't contract to do that anymore. No, you can't be paid. He said, oh, I can do the work. I just can't be paid. Right. So he'll just volunteer. He said, it's only a couple times a year, maybe an hour or two. He said, I'll just volunteer to do that. And that's fine. So you can be volunteers. You can't be paid anything extra other than yourself.
So that's like, if I had a company in town and it was contracted with something had nothing to do with the library, but was still a county or a city or a county job, then we couldn't do it?
No, it's only you couldn't do it for the library.
Okay,
You can't do it for the board of which you are a member.
okay.
and like, nor can your kids work for the library. Like my kids could never work for the library if I were on the board. Yeah, right? Is this following?
Well, not necessarily.
Oh, okay. The poor things have been.
So I think it's maybe not ethical. And I don't think there's a specific.
I thought it
We'll
was
get to that.
very specific. I thought so too,
It is
because my
very
kids were
specific, but it doesn't
furious.
include you. So we'll get to that in a minute. So then there's Title 18, which is a criminal code. This is pay a fine, go to jail stuff. So bribes, threats. Can't be compensated for your past decisions. So once you decide you've had enough fun and go do something else, and somebody says, you know, you did such a good job on there, I'd like to, you know, do this for you, and still a problem. Compensating public servants, those who are paid to do something can't be paid extra. Probably I fit into that category more than anybody else in the state. I frequently get calls from members saying, we understand you do board training. We'd like you to come. How much would that cost? A lot, but you've already paid it. If I accepted anything in addition, other than your exorbitant salaries here, three Hershey's Kisses and a bottle of water, to take that. But other than that, it would be a crime for me to do that. I'm using public funds for your personal benefit. Disclosing confidential information. And the fact that you're not in office or lack jurisdiction.
So,
Last week and next week, or 2 weeks ago, and then next week I'll be talking to new county elected officials. I will point out to them that we have several counties that have 2 new commissioners. If they get together and decide something, number one, they violate the open meeting law, and secondly, it's probably invalid and they're liable to get sued. Several years ago, Ada County had that. They had 2 new commissioners who came in and they decided both of them didn't like one department head. So they fired him, and by the time they paid the jury verdict of 1.8 million and his attorneys and their attorneys, they'd spend over $3 million for a decision they made before they were in office. The good news is they're not ICRIT members, so you didn't help pay it.
so, what, another, benefit of this job is usually a Christmas present, which is a book. Is that, are we going over and above anything?
You are not.
Okay. I was just,
I will
was
talk
like-
about gifts in a minute, but that's different.
oh, okay.
What about an amalgamation of 2 of these? What if you use or disclose confidential information for purposes of a political endorsement or influence?
Well,
Influencing the
if you
electorate.
disclose confidential information, it doesn't matter what it's for. So if you take off that personal economic benefit.
Okay.
So if it's the benefit of your friend, it's still gonna be a crime.
Okay.
I mean, you have access to confidential information. You need to treat it confidential. But if you go down and, you know, you say, my friend's running for office and their opponent has been checking out some shaky books, and I happen to know that because I'm a library trustee, I can bribe the staff to give me that information, and you disclose it. Yeah, that's gonna be criminal. And should be.
How about things like public salaries for our staff?
They're all,
That's public knowledge,
That's
therefore,
public,
and we've done that, we've gone to other agencies and said, how much we're paying because we.
that if I request it or anybody else requests it, it's all available to the public. Pretty much anything that has a dollar sign in front of it is gonna be public information. Possible exception of what books the fine was for, but now that you don't do fines, you don't have to worry about that.
I think that the library, like we are big time privacy thing, that would not be something, we don't even keep those records, do we?
I thought it was-
What records? I'm sorry, I didn't.
Oh, what he was saying, he just used the example.
If I checked out a book and I didn't return it and I had a fine, which you don't do anymore, but if I had, when I did have,
Could we
the fact that I owned a fine would probably be public information. The fact of what book I had, you wouldn't share.
Right.
We purge, how often do we purge? I mean, is it, within a week of when I took a book out, can somebody come find out what I took out?
Well, as soon as you return it, it's cleared off your account unless you've selected to have your reading history tracked. And then it's on your account.
But that wouldn't be available to the public under
Right.
public record.
That's why, which I.
That would be the confidential information, that if you released it would be a crime. If you released it.
But I
for
also think
benefit.
it's helpful for us to assure the public that what you use in our library is not gonna be available.
Yeah. And so there's a specific statute about library records that may relate to what someone looked at or checked out is not available to the public. And it's in with historical artifacts or something. It's in a weird place in the statute, but I saw it the other day. So you can't accept gifts given because of your public position that are worth over $50. That doesn't mean that's something from a citizen. So the library wanted to give you something that in the book turned out to be $55. It wouldn't be a big deal. Of course, they get wholesale, so they probably only paid 45, so you're okay. Or any risk of undermining your official impartiality. I mean, this $50 was years ago. You could take somebody to dinner. It was designed for lobbyists. You could take somebody to dinner for under $50. Now you can't. I mean, I am amazed at the change in restaurant costs in the last 3 months.
Mhm.
I mean, I had a basic, I shouldn't say basic, I had a really good burger at lunch today with fries, a glass of water, and it was $15.
Is there anything that comes after the second or?
What?
Is there anything that
Yes.
comes after this?
There is, but I don't know what it is.
Okay.
There is something in the statute.
Okay.
Yeah, that was just language out of the statute. I cut it off at the wrong place.
All right. Well, we'll
That's 3 things now I've got to correct.
Right, this is
I mean, I've
not the board, well, it is the board if you want it correct to come to before, or it's not if you don't want this detail.
I do want the detail. Can't hire your relative.
There we go.
So nobody can hire their relatives. So the library director could never hire their own relatives. For cities and counties, the county can't hire a relative of the commissioner, the city can't hire relatives of the council. It does not say that for other boards. My belief, and if one of your relatives wanted to apply to the library, I mean, you absolutely should get in writing from Katie, her opinion. But my belief is her opinion would be they could work there because you don't do the hiring. By statute, you don't do the hiring. And it's not specific in the statute for all boards, it's only for cities and counties. Having said that, I think doesn't look good.
Exactly, I was gonna say. Staying squeaky clean.
However, if the relative's there first, and then you get elected, they can stay, and that's clear. So 3 weeks ago, when we're talking with the new county officials in the northern part of the state, Ben Robertson, who was he's commissioner-elect in Boundary County, his sister-in-law, who's my niece, works for the county in the treasurer's office. She can stay in that position, but she couldn't be promoted to a different. You go farther north, I'm related to everybody, so. So if you violate Title 18 stuff, it's misdemeanor. So don't do that. Stealing funds from a public agency, the penalty is much greater than private, so just go knock off a 7-Eleven like everybody else does. Penalty is less. And you can't use public funds for promotion of ballot issues, so overrides, bond elections, or to promote a candidate.
Just going back to that last slide, I mean, because it's in Title 18, then it's obviously it's a crime. But if you were to disclose private information about an individual, that was private information that you ought not to have disclosed because by virtue of the statutes we just went through, then that individual can bring us a cause of action against you
A civil.
for their civilly,
Yes.
for having
Yes. They could.
invaded their privacy or
Yes,
violated their privacy rather.
yes,
I just wanted to point that out because yes, it's a crime, but doesn't mean that you wouldn't also
right.
be subject to a civil lawsuit.
And probably would not be determined, probably wouldn't be protected by the Tort Claims Act because that's probably not within course and scope of your job. it's hard to get out of course and scope, that might do it. So how to stay out of trouble, consult with your attorney, tell them the whole story, and then follow their advice. Don't consult with your attorney and they say, oh, you can't do that, and then go find a different attorney who'll tell you a different answer. Or don't call me and say, what do you think? I've actually had that happen. And then follow their advice. Even if they're wrong, which is unlikely, but if they're wrong, they've given you pretty much 100% protection. If you seek it on, when it comes to conflicts of interest, public records, and open meeting law issues.
Another follow then, Jim, thank you, is, what does, errors and omissions coverage do for us? Do we have to have it? Do we buy it? Do you provide it? What does it
No,
do?
it's part of the policy.
What protection does it provide for us board members?
Well, it provides pretty broad protection if you're sued individually for something that you did as a board member on behalf of the district.
So if somebody sued someone individually, it would still be the district that would pay.
If what they sued them for was related to their duty as a board. Yeah, I mean, in my past life as a county commissioner, I got sued so many times you can't even count it. Most of the time for things I had nothing to do with. Some sheriff's deputy arrested somebody and they thought they were wrongly arrested, so they file a lawsuit against that person and their sergeant and the sheriff and the commissioners.
Oh,
Now, there were a couple of lawsuits that were filed that named me for things that I did. There's one, yeah, things that I actually did, yeah.
Story for another day.
Or today, yeah. So one of the lawsuits that was filed was, it snowed a bunch. It can do that up there. And so I shouldn't have been doing this, but I did for 12 years. I plowed snow. All winter, there'd be a grader parked out and I'd go grab the grader and I'd plow snow because I lived out a ways and near one of the worst hills that was a school bus route. I'd go plow snow. So I plowed snow, and when you plow snow, what do you get at the edge? You were talking about,
Berm.
you get a berm. So we had probably 12, 14 inches of new snow and we had a pretty good berm. And there was already a bit of a berm there. And so I plowed across where there was a railroad crossing. And so the statute says the stop signs at railroads should be 7 feet to the bottom. And this lady it was a snowstorm, blizzard. So have you ever seen a train go in a blizzard? It's like a sheet because it reflects off all the snow. But anyway, so she drove in front of the train, which was going slow. She was going slow. Fortunately, there was a berm on the side of the road. So it flipped her car up, lit easily on the berm. And she walked out of it without a scratch. But her car was upside down. She was there. And so she filed a claim alleging that it was our fault, the county's fault. They didn't know that I drove the grader to put it there, that the sign, and they took a picture of the sign. It was still sticking out of the snow, but not 7 feet. And they said, oh, that's obviously the county's fault. I mean, we get claims that are that ridiculous. So that one I did do.
so we had a question at the very beginning and Jim said, wait. And it was Judy's? Okay. Do you remember?
You want me to remember way back then?
I'm sorry.
But that's it. I think what we were talking about, you were gonna come back to it, was one of, how do we balance our rights to our ideas and sharing them with the responsibility we take on as board members to represent the board?
So, you don't have a responsibility to represent the board.
When I'm a board-
Unless you're speaking for the board. So let's use an example of lobby, because that's a real good example.
Yep,
When you go down to lobby,
and
You're not-
I'm wearing my library name tag.
you may, great,
I should do that, right? When I'm down there lobbying for something, I should identify myself,
sure.
okay?
And plus the fact that you're an elected official means you don't have to have a green tag. You can lobby
That's right.
without the green
That's right.
tag.
Green tags are lobby.
But when you're lobbying, you don't necessarily, unless you specify and say, our board has this position, you're just speaking on behalf of libraries in general. You don't have to represent the thoughts of this board. And you may have another board member who disagrees and they lobby on the other side, and that's fine. So, I mean, it's an awkward balance. I mean, it can make life complicated when you come back, but you're not obligated to defend the actions of the board as individual board members. And in fact, you may strongly disagree and you may go talk to citizens and say, come and talk some sense into my fellow board members. So you have, when you're here, you're part of a board. You can vote no, but ultimately it's a board decision, but you don't have to,
then
have
that
to go forth
decision-
and espouse that.
Whatever the board decided is the way things are gonna have to happen on behalf of
Right,
the library. And even though I don't like that decision,
right.
I have to be part of what the board has agreed to, as a
Well-
board member. And continue to carry that message.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
You can say, the board decided our policy was to give everybody a big bonus at Christmas, and I voted against it. And I strongly stand by that, and I think we did the wrong thing, so. That way, that's not a hypothetical from a different part of the state. So it make, to the extent that you can defend the actions of boards, that's great, but as individual board members, that's not an obligation.
It's interesting, in the, ethics for library trustees, there's more stringent suggestions.
I understand that. I also understand why they would say that.
Mhm. But so it's good to know, though, that we have the ability to speak out against actions which we may not agree with.
Yes and no. I mean, if it's policy, absolutely. Where you have to be, where there's some required care is anything relating to staff. Staff discipline, hiring, firing, all of those things, that's
Opinions about anything like that. So
opinions about staff shouldn't be being shared outside of executive session.
Right.
But other opinions about policy, about budget, those are fair game to have
So
disagreements.
the things that we have jurisdiction over are fair game to complain about.
Right.
If we vote a certain way. So if we have jurisdiction over a policy, so we're talking policies,
Pretty much everything other than staff,
Personnel.
personnel.
And that's all stuff that the public would be able to read in the minutes anyway, like how we voted.
Yes.
So,
Well, only if you ask for a roll call vote.
well, the way ours is, it says who says yes, and then therefore the ones that say no, it's a given. And then if there's an,
Oh, okay. So you're
Extension.
basically doing kind of a semi roll call vote.
yeah,
Anyway.
yeah.
yeah, it's easy to tell from minutes.
Yeah.
Okay,
how
yeah,
people-
and that's fine. I know that many of our members now actually do formal roll call votes on every action.
Yeah, and ours basically is because it shows.
Okay, I didn't
Shows one
realize that.
side of it, so it's
Most,
obvious.
most of the
the other
minutes
side.
that I see around the state don't do that. It just says the motion passed.
Mhm.
So if a board member wants to be sure that we know how everybody voted, then you call for the roll call
Right.
vote.
Right, but it may be irrelevant if you already can tell, pretty much, so. But yeah, you still have that right for a formal roll call vote.
Anything else?
I've squandered more than my allotted time, so thank you for putting up with me.
Oh, it was very helpful. And for those of you who didn't hear, Jim is retiring in 3 weeks. So we got him.
3 weeks in a day, don't.
Who's counting?
Well,
Which will be
you
weird
know,
for this library because you've been our,
Go to.
I-
our
I
go-to,
have,
our go-to person for 100 years.
Yes.
And
As I have for, I've probably been primary contact for library districts in the state.
you and Jeremy Mason, what role does ICRIM have when you go off and retire? Or what connection do we have then with ICRIM? Through someone else that's designated or just back to ICRIM?
No, it's just,
Depends.
you can call the number that you called to get me
Mhm.
and let them know what the question is, and they'll direct you to. And it probably will be, if it's risk management, or if it's a personnel question, it will go to personnel policy, it'll go to Tammy. It may go to Carl, who's our legal counsel, risk management legal counsel. And a newer risk management staff person is Kelly Ponanen, who kind of deals with a lot of general things. She was risk manager for Ada County for 17 years, so she's
There's a
kind of
lot.
seen a thing or two. So she's kind of a generalist, that does a lot of things. Probably if it comes to governance questions, there's not really a designated person, but Carl being an attorney and he served on a school board, he's provided civil counsel to boards, he's pretty knowledgeable about the governance stuff.
And it's fair that we, probably through our chair, can call ICRIM, that there's no charge for that. That's what, as you say, we paid a lot for in the beginning by being citizens. This is state service that's provided to various.
It's provided to all our members, yeah.
Well, we pay a premium, right? No, the district pays.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, you're paying for it.
I was
Yes.
teasing Jim about how much we paid for it, but as he said at the beginning, a whole lot.
Yes,
Phone call doesn't cost anything.
well, for some of those little members, it's really not a whole lot, but for you,
Thanks a lot.
it's based on your total property, which is a lot.
That's a good point. It's physical
And-
property.
That was,
And-
we did that.
Yes.
I mean, libraries have not inexpensive buildings filled with really expensive contents. So libraries are really property heavy.
And does ICRIM help us figure out the ways to be cost effective as we go along? We're gonna look at new construction.
Probably not when it comes to new construction.
Are there other things that ICRIM can review for us to help us contain costs or risk?
Probably the things we would review would be primarily personnel policies. We'd be glad to look at other policies, but that's really not our expertise. Personnel policy more than anything else.
That would be good, because we're gonna be doing that. That was a request that would happen. So when our new director comes on board, so we'll have to.
So before your new director jumps into that, he or she should have a chat with probably Tammy and Carl, because I'm assuming that you may end up with somebody out of state. And if you end up with somebody out of state or somebody who hasn't worked in a library district,
Different picture.
then they're gonna be in a new world here, and we can guide them on that. The narrow path that you need to take in terms of the at will for cause thing, because that's unique to library districts.
I know that, our policies in the past have been vetted by you guys.
Yeah, we've
Yeah.
gone to.
Yeah, and you,
Should.
and which would have been easy because you've started off with our samples.
Yeah. So if we did something and you couldn't insure us, do you have any idea? Could we even get insurance from anybody else? You were saying that counties weren't able to be insured.
Well, that was because private insurers discovered that insuring jails was a losing proposition, so they just dropped it.
Oh,
That isn't gonna happen to you. There may be some things that we don't cover. Most of the things we don't cover, you probably couldn't insure anyway.
but I mean, like NIC, you
Yeah.
guys had to drop NIC.
Right.
So,
What's a nice gonna do?
so my question is it, where do they get other insurance and how much is it? Is it a lot more?
I don't know the answer to that.
Not every governmental entity in Idaho uses ICRIM. There are other
Right.
carriers available. It probably is costlier. I would guess, but I don't know.
So the only one I'm familiar with is Bonner County, which chose not to stay with us. I mean, it was their choice.
Surprise, surprise.
And the actual insurance that they purchased was less than ICRIM. But they ended up with large deductibles for claims. So they had to cover a lot of things. So it's hard, it's a trade-off in how you do that. There are also public agencies. City of Boise is totally self-insured. Ada County is self-insured for liability. I refer to them as half an ICRIT member. Because we buy so many billions of dollars worth of property coverage, our property rates are really low. And so they insure their property with us for fire and damage, that sort of thing, the bigger property, but liability, they self-insure. So there's lots of options. I shouldn't say there's lots of options. There
There are
some.
other
There some
options.
yeah. ICRIP is not a requirement. It's just the best option.
Well, I think 3 weeks from retirement, and he still says that, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, thank you. That's right. Thank you.
Well, I've been there. If I'd have stayed until April 1st, which I should have, April Fool's Day, that would have been exactly 30 years as an employee. And I was on the board for 7 years before that. A little gap. Been around.
That's why I asked you, are you available after you retired?
Probably. Some people here have my phone, my personal cell phone. Don't you?
Kitty, you
I
have
do.
that number?
I do have that number. I didn't realize I didn't know. It's just the easiest way to get a hold of
It
you.
is, absolutely it is.
Great. Well,
Well, I should have retired years ago. I just was not smart. I'm 74 and a half. That's time to do it.
Feels right for you. Good health to enjoy it now, the main thing.
That's my goal.
well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you for putting up with me
Anybody
this
else?
long.
Yeah, we have really appreciated it,
Mhm.
that you being able to come up and do this. And I'm glad the snow stopped. It was icky yesterday. It's fine today.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I should be able to get over the past mine. Where I'm staying tonight is
Are you up in Wallace tonight?
Kellogg. It'll be about 3-minute walk tomorrow morning to where I'm going. So
Oh, yeah. I think so. I would think that has to be fine by now.
Yeah.
Okay.
all right, well,
Well,
thank
well,
you.
that's
Thank you
easy.
for all
Thank
you
you so
do. I
much.
know it's not always fun, but why you do it, right? Not
Right.
for the big paychecks.
It is for the 3 Hershey kisses and
Yeah,
all
the
the
three-
It
water
is that, yes, yeah.
We have 3
and the
more.
book at
Jim.
Christmas.
Yeah, the 3 more Hershey's. for Jim.
I don't need any. My $15 burger was way bigger than I should have.
So where did you get this burger that you said was good?
It was at the sawmill.
Oh, really? Oh, good.
Have you not ever been there?
When they first opened, I went there and it wasn't good.
So here's
So I've
what
been
they do.
back.
It's a pretty normal burger. Their fries, of course, nobody has fries as good as McDonald's, but their fries are okay, but not great.
Okay.
But on dessert, they have what they call bacon jam or bacon jelly. And I looked at that and I thought, wow, that's gotta be something terrible, but it has little bits of bacon and a little bit of heat to it, which is
Ooh,
really,
That
really
sounds
good.
good.
That was the good. That was
That
good.
sounds good.
Bacon jam.
I'll have to
Love
give it another try.
I have to pick up a child from school today. I'm sorry. Can I move that we adjourn?
Yes, it's been moved. We adjourn. All those in favor?
I.
I can't believe it's.
All right, okay, good. Now continue your discussion.
All right, thank you.
I brought a check for Regina, but I need to hand it her.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Bail us out. You're not making much
Are
money.
you taking checks?
Sure, I don't